That black, crusty ring around your burner heads isn't dirt. Dirt wipes off. That's cooked-on grease, and once it's been through enough heat cycles, it turns into something closer to varnish than food residue. I've pulled burner grates out of home kitchens that looked like they'd been dipped in tar. Scrubbing doesn't touch it. Scraping just polishes it, but soak it in the right thing for the right amount of time, and it lets go on its own. No elbow grease, no scratched metal. I want to show you exactly what that soak is and why it works when everything else you've tried hasn't. Walk into almost any kitchen that's been used regularly for 6 months or more, pull off the burner grates and the drip pans underneath, and you'll usually find the same thing: a dark, sticky ring around the base of each burner head, a crust along the edges of the grates where they sit closest to the flame, and underneath, in the pan or the well the burner sits in, a layer of grease that's gone from liquid to solid to something in between, tacky, dark amber or black, sometimes almost glossy, like it's been shellacked on. Most people don't notice this until it's bad, and there's a reason for that. Grease splatter from cooking is thin, it's clear or light amber when it lands. It doesn't look like much of anything on day one, or even after a few uses, so it gets ignored. You wipe the stovetop surface, because that's what's visible, and the grates and burner caps get a quick swipe at best, or nothing at all. But every time you cook, a little more grease lands in the same spots: the base of the burner, the underside of the grate, the drip tray, and every time that burner heats up, it cooks that grease a little more. It's not accumulating like dust accumulates, it's baking, one meal at a time, into a harder and harder layer. By the time someone finally notices, usually because the grates have gone from silver or black to a dull, sticky brown, or because there's a burning smell every time they turn a burner on, the grease isn't grease anymore in any normal sense. It's polymerized. I'll get into what that means in a second, but functionally, what it means for you is this: it's not going to wipe off with a rag and dish soap, and in a lot of cases, it's not going to come off with scrubbing either. You end up with people going at their grates with steel wool, wire brushes, even razor blades, and either it doesn't work or it works but takes the finish off the metal with it. I've seen people give up entirely and just buy new grates and burner caps, which on some ranges runs you $80 to $150 for a full set. That's a real cost for something that's genuinely fixable with about $2 of stuff you probably already have under your sink. Here's the part that actually matters, because once you understand what's happening chemically, the fix makes obvious sense instead of feeling like a trick. Cooking oil and grease, when they're fresh, are mostly made up of long fat molecules, triglycerides if you want the technical name, and they're relatively simple to break down with soap and hot water. Soap works on grease because it's got one end that likes water and one end that likes fat, so it wraps around grease molecules and lets water carry them away. That's basic dishwashing, and it works fine on a pan you wash the same day you cooked in it. But burner grease doesn't get washed the same day. It sits, and then it gets heated again and again. Every time that burner fires up, any grease sitting near it gets hit with direct heat, sometimes flame-adjacent heat in the 300 to 500 degree range, depending on how close it is to the burner ring. At those temperatures, the fat molecules don't just sit there, they start to break down and reform into different structures. Some of it oxidizes, meaning it reacts with the oxygen in the air and starts forming new bonds. Some of it polymerizes, which means individual fat molecules start linking together into long chains. Kind of the same basic process that lets linseed oil cure into a hard finish on wood furniture. That's not a coincidence. It's the same chemistry, just less controlled. The result is a substance that behaves nothing like the grease it started as. It's no longer water-soluble in any meaningful way. Soap molecules can't grab onto it the way they grab onto fresh grease, because the structure has changed. It's not simple fat chains anymore. It's a cross-linked mess that behaves more like a plastic or a varnish coating. That's why dish soap alone, even hot water and a lot of scrubbing, barely makes a dent once it's reached this stage. You're not cleaning grease off the metal, you're trying to remove a cured coating that's chemically bonded itself to the surface. I've had guys I train ask me why the same cleaner that strips grease off a stainless steel counter in 10 seconds does nothing to a burner cap that's been baked on for 2 years. This is why. It's not the same substance anymore, even though it started as the exact same cooking oil. The other piece of this that people don't think about is where the grease actually lands. Burner heads have small ports where the flame comes out, and grates have narrow gaps and undersides that never get wiped because you can't easily reach them without taking the whole thing apart. Grease that settles in those spots isn't just sitting on a flat surface where a rag can catch it. It's settling into grooves, threads, and ports, and every time the burner runs, that grease bakes exactly where it's hardest to physically reach. That's why scrubbing the visible top surface of a grate can look like it did something, while the real buildup, underneath and in the ports, just keeps growing. Before I get into what actually works, I want to go through what doesn't because I see the same 3 mistakes constantly and they either waste your time or damage the fixtures. Mistake 1. Scrubbing with abrasive pads or steel wool. This is the instinct almost everyone has because it's a hard, stuck-on substance, so it feels like it needs abrasion. The problem is that burner grates and caps are usually cast iron, porcelain-coated steel, or in some cases aluminum, and every one of those finishes can be damaged by aggressive scrubbing. Steel wool will scratch porcelain coating right down to the metal underneath, and once that coating is broken, it rusts faster and grease sticks to it even more aggressively going forward because you've now got exposed porous metal instead of a smooth, sealed surface. On cast iron, heavy scrubbing strips the seasoning layer that's actually helping the grate resist rust and buildup. So you scrub hard, maybe get some of the surface grime off, but you've made the long-term problem worse. Mistake 2. Spraying on oven cleaner and walking away. Oven cleaners are strong. Most of them are sodium hydroxide based, which is a genuinely aggressive chemical, and people assume that means it'll eat through baked-on grease anywhere they spray it. The issue is twofold. First, a lot of these products are designed to work in an enclosed oven cavity, where fumes stay contained and the surface can sit undisturbed. Used in the open on a stovetop, the active ingredient evaporates or drifts away before it's had time to actually break the polymerized layer down. Second, and more important, sodium hydroxide is genuinely corrosive to aluminum and can discolor or pit some porcelain finishes if it sits too long or gets used repeatedly. People end up with grates that are technically cleaner but visibly etched or dulled, and once that surface texture changes, grease actually grips it harder next time. Mistake 3. Trying to scrape it off with a blade or metal tool while it's cold and hard. This one comes from a reasonable place. If you can chip ice off a windshield, why not chip grease off a grate? But cold, hardened, polymerized grease doesn't chip cleanly like ice does. It's more like old paint. Scraping it dry just shaves off the top layer, burnishes the rest into the surface even more, and on porcelain or coated finishes, a metal blade will gouge the coating before it makes real progress on the grease. I've seen grates that had more scrape marks in the finish than actual grease removed. The common thread in all 3 mistakes is the same. People are trying to physically force the grease off instead of chemically breaking it down first. That's the wrong order of operations, and it's the whole reason the soak method works so much better. Here's the method I've used on hundreds of stovetops, both in home kitchens and back when I was doing commercial range maintenance. It's simple, it's cheap, and the actual work is done by time and chemistry, not by your arm. What you need: a container big enough to submerge your grates and burner caps, a big plastic tub, a cooler, even the bathtub lined with an old towel works fine for larger cast iron grates. Very hot tap water, as hot as your tap will go, or boiling water from the stove if your grates fit in a pot. Dish soap, a real degreasing dish soap, the blue stuff, not a fancy scented one. Baking soda, and if you've got it, ammonia, which is optional but speeds things up considerably. A soft nylon brush, not steel wool, and an old toothbrush for the burner ports specifically. Step 1. Remove everything you can. Take the grates off, take the burner caps off, and if your model allows it, take the burner heads themselves off too. Most modern gas ranges have caps that just lift off once the grates are removed. Don't try to soak anything while it's still attached to the range. You need full submersion, not surface contact. Step 2. Build your soak. Fill your container with hot water as hot as you can get it. This matters more than people think. The heat is doing real work here, not just making the soap sudsier. Hot water softens the polymerized grease layer and speeds up every chemical reaction that follows. Add a generous amount of dish soap, more than you'd normally use for dishes. Think a quarter cup for a decent-sized tub. Then add about half a cup of baking soda. Baking soda is mildly alkaline, and that alkalinity helps break down fats and also helps lift the burnt-on layer without being harsh enough to damage most finishes. If you're using ammonia, add about a quarter cup. Ammonia is a genuinely strong degreaser, and it's what commercial kitchens have used for decades on range hoods and grates. But it needs ventilation, so crack a window or do this outside if you go this route. Never mix ammonia with anything bleach-based. That combination produces toxic fumes, so keep your soak simple. Soap, baking soda, hot water, and optionally ammonia. Nothing else. Step 3. Submerge and wait. Drop the grates and caps in fully submerged. This is the part almost everyone rushes, and it's the single biggest reason people think soaking doesn't work when they've tried it before. You are not soaking this for 20 minutes. You're soaking it for a minimum of 2 hours for lightly built up grates. And honestly, for anything that's been neglected a year or more, I tell people to just leave it overnight. The grease needs time to actually rehydrate and soften, layer by layer. You can't rush a chemical process by wishing it along. But there's one step people always skip, and it's the one that matters most. I'll get to it in a second because it's the difference between some of the grease came off and the grease literally disappeared. Step 4. Check and reheat if needed. If you're doing an overnight soak, this doesn't apply, but if you're doing a shorter soak, here's a trick that most people never think of. About halfway through, pull the container over to the stove or add a fresh round of very hot water. Grease loosens fastest right after the water goes from lukewarm back up to hot, because the heat re-softens the outer layer that's already started breaking down. One reheat cycle in the middle of a soak does more than just leaving it in slowly cooling water the whole time. Step 5. The part people skip. Agitation with the right tool at the right time. Here it is. Once the soak has done its job, the grease will have gone from hard and glossy to soft, almost gel-like, sometimes even starting to lift off in sheets on its own. This is where people make their last mistake. They pull the grates out, see the grease has softened, and then grab a stiff brush or a scrubbing pad and go at it hard, thinking more force finishes the job faster. It doesn't. At this stage, the grease is soft enough that you barely need pressure at all. A soft nylon brush used with light, steady strokes will lift softened grease off in seconds. For the burner ports specifically, the little holes where the flame comes out, an old toothbrush is exactly the right size and softness to clear them without pushing debris further in. Wipe with the grain of the grate's casting pattern if it has one, not against it, because going against it can push residue into grooves instead of out of them. If there are still a few stubborn spots after the brush, don't scrub harder. Soak that specific spot again for another 30 minutes with a wet rag pressed against it, then brush again. Stubborn spots are almost always spots the water didn't fully reach the first time, not spots that need more force. Step 6. Rinse and dry completely before reassembly. Rinse everything thoroughly under hot running water to get all the soap and loosened grease residue off. Soap residue left behind will actually attract new grease faster once the burner's back in use. Then dry everything fully. This matters most for cast iron grates specifically, because any moisture left on bare cast iron will start to rust within hours, especially once you put it back over a warm burner. A dry towel, followed by a few minutes sitting out, or even a quick pass in a low oven if you're not in a rush, gets you there. Pro tip: once your cast iron grates are completely dry, rub a very thin layer of cooking oil into them with a paper towel before putting them back on the range, the same way you'd season a cast iron skillet. It takes 15 seconds and it does two things. First, it reestablishes a light protective layer so the metal doesn't flash rust from ambient humidity. Second, and this is the part people don't expect, a properly seasoned surface actually resists new grease buildup better than a bare one, because there's nothing porous for splatter to soak into and bond with. My grandfather did this on every cast iron piece he touched, stove grates included, and it's the single habit that makes the next cleaning, 6 months or a year down the line, take a fraction of the time this one did. One more thing worth knowing before you go do this yourself: the type of grease matters just as much as the soak time. If your buildup is mostly from high heat frying, bacon, stir fry, anything with a lot of oil at high temperatures, expect it to need the longer end of the soak time, because that grease has usually gone through more heat cycles and polymerized more thoroughly. If it's mostly from simmering, sauces, or lighter cooking, you'll often see results in as little as an hour. Don't judge the method by a short soak on heavily built-up grease and assume it doesn't work. Match the soak time to how bad the buildup actually is. For the burner taps themselves, one extra note: if your range has sealed burners with electric ignition components nearby, never submerge the ignition assembly itself, only the caps and grates that are designed to come fully off. If you're not sure what's safe to remove, check your range's manual for the specific parts rated for cleaning, because the layout does vary between brands. And for the drip pans or the trough underneath the burners, the exact same soak works, though I'd give those an extra 30 minutes since they tend to have thicker buildup from years of drips accumulating in one spot, rather than getting spread thin like splatter does. Once everything's back together, run each burner for a minute with nothing on it. You'll usually get a faint burning smell the first time. That's just any leftover oil from reseasoning or trace moisture burning off. Completely normal, and it clears up fast. If you get a strong burning smell that doesn't fade, that means something is not fully dry, so shut it off and give it more drying time before trying again. That's the whole method: hot water, dish soap, baking soda, time, and a light hand at the end instead of a heavy one. It costs almost nothing, and it saves you from replacing grates that don't actually need replacing. If you've got a stove that's been neglected worse than these burners, or a cleaning problem you've been fighting for years and can't seem to solve, drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and some of the best videos on this channel started as a comment from someone dealing with exactly that kind of stuck problem. If this saved you a trip to buy new grates, subscribe. I've got a whole series on getting cast iron and range hardware back to like-new condition without wrecking the finish. And if you're dealing with a range hood that's just as bad as these burners were, go watch my video on degreasing range hood filters next. Same principle, same soak, just a different piece of the kitchen that people neglect until it's a real problem.